Alright, so on this episode we're going to talk about deck step mast versus keel step mast. When Ann and I were in Marina del Rey, we were talking to a guy that had been sailing, living aboard his boat for about 9 years. I said, hey, what do you prefer? What is a better mast? And he said, well, take two boats, park them side by side, one deck step, one keel step, pull all the shrouds and stays off, and see which mast is still standing. Which sounded like pretty sound advice to me at the time. But I talked to another guy because I wanted to get numerous opinions, and he said essentially the same thing, except you're out in the ocean, your shrouds or stays come apart, your mast comes off. What would you rather have? A mast that'll come completely off the boat that you can cut away in a hurry, or a keel step mast which probably breaks? You've got a spike sticking out of the deck, rigging and standing rigging and running rigging get wrapped around, tangled up in a mess, and you've got a partial mast beating the hell out of the side of your boat. Which one's better? Well, I don't think there's actually an answer to that. I think it has to do with your personal preference. A keel step mast goes through the deck of the boat. That deck joint will actually be a holding point in the event that you do lose a shroud or a stay. It may give you the time you need in order to use a halyard and set up a temporary stay. At least to limp it into a port of some sort where you can get a repair done. Now, not to say that a deck step mast will immediately fall off the boat if you lose a shroud or a stay, but there is a greater risk of the mast coming down. So when I weighed my options, what I decided was, well, if I do lose a shroud or a stay, I want the mast to at least try and stay in place long enough to get a temporary stay put in place. Now, with that being said, if for some reason the keel step mast was to come off of its step, that thing is going to be a battering ram on the inside of a sailboat. And that is a scary thought. If you're in really rough seas and you come off the step, which they shouldn't, but they can, that thing could twist and turn and just tear the inside of a boat up. But I think the danger of that happening is pretty minimal. If the mast was to break and you still have a little stub sticking out of the deck, if you can MacGyver a jerry-rigged sail in order to help try and get you into a port, then I believe that I would rather go with a keel step mast personally. Yes, they do get water inside the mast, which does go into the bilge. If you've got a bilge pump in there, it'll pump itself out if it's on a float. It's just something that you've got to look at. Water coming down the mast, to me, is not a gigantic deal. Obviously, you want to try and get the joint sealed, eliminate as much water as you possibly can that will come down the mast. But one of the things that's not been discussed a lot is deck compression. On a deck step mast, you have a compression post or compression truss. Now, those posts can be made of steel or aluminum or wood or some sort of composite, but they are what takes the load between the deck and the keel of the boat. To me, it's one extra thing that needs to be taken care of, looked at and inspected. If that compression post or truss starts to sag or get shorter for whatever reason, then you can get deck compression, where the mast is actually sitting on the deck of your boat. You can force that deck down and start cracking and crazing and have a lot of trouble end up developing. We've got a tabernacle mast, which is designed to allow the mast to lay down. You can lower it to go under 2 lower bridges, things like that. That would be another weak point, in my opinion. A tabernacle mast is not something that I personally would feel comfortable taking off across the ocean with. I do like the fact that a deck step can be cut away from the boat, if need be. If it did end up in the drink, you actually have a chance of being able to try and pull that mast back up onto the boat, conditions, allowing, and you've got a mast that can be restood. Keel step mast, if part of the mast ends up in the drink, the mast is broke, you're buying a whole new mast. So there's goods and bads about each one. When it's all said and done, I'm looking at less parts to it. I've got one mast, goes from the keel to the top. I don't have to worry about a compression post or compression truss to support that deck step mast. I can use that joint in the deck as a binding point to keep that mast in place if I was to lose a shroud. To me, that is a gigantic important piece. So Was it a determining factor when we bought Southern Cross? Did it have to have a keel step mast? No, it didn't have to have one. I felt better that it did have one. That wouldn't have ruled out buying the boat. Okay, so I'm not going to go and say that you absolutely have to have a keel step mast. But you know, for my comfort level, a deck step mast wasn't my first pick, but it wouldn't have ruled it out. The biggest thing is your rigging, right? And we were talking about swept back spreaders or straight spreaders. What I've noticed with the swept back spreaders are, a lot of times they don't have a backstay. They bring the shrouds far enough aft to eliminate needing a backstay. I personally feel much more comfortable with a backstay. If you have a deck step mast and you lose your forestay and you don't have a backstay, the only thing holding that mast up are your shrouds. And I'm not willing to take that risk. So I don't like the swept back spreaders that eliminate the backstay. I definitely wouldn't want the swept back spreaders, no backstay, and a deck step mast. To me, that is a really iffy combination. Not saying that it's unsafe. I'm not saying that it won't handle going offshore. What I'm saying is, I personally would not pick that particular setup. I believe you've got to have your shrouds, you've got to have a backstay, you've got to have a forestay. And I think you get that little bit of added extra security by having the keel step mast, the mast being able to ride against the deck joint, gives you that little bit of time to try and get a temporary stay put in place. So I think that pretty well covers a deck step mast versus keel step mast. When I sum it all up, you know, I'm not going to say one's better than the other. I'm just going to say that I feel more comfortable with the keel step mast.